I've said before, so say I now again, there's nothing more important than what we're doing in fellowshipping. And I absolutely love that we love each other the way we do and want to talk about our week and what's going on and all of that. But we're going to spend the next half hour or so considering Hebrews chapter 11. We got to verse 20 last week, and I didn't want to just blow through Isaac and Jacob and Esau without giving them proper consideration. And so we are going to do that now. In verse number 20, Hebrews chapter 11, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Now, I don't know of another biblical person who had it harder than Isaac. Why would that be? Could you imagine growing up in the shadow of one as great as Abraham? I mean, that's something. Everything Isaac may have done was overshadowed by his famous father. Isaac was born to Abraham. His mother was Sarah. Have you ever, maybe you have dealt with always being introduced to so-and-so's son or daughter, or so-and-so's brother or sister, so-and-so's friend. Always around someone who seemingly overshadows you by who they are. That can be difficult. And when you think of Isaac, I mean, it encourages me that he is in the Hall of Fame of Faith. I mean, what great thing did Isaac do? What remarkable thing did Isaac do? I mean, from my vantage point, the way I read, he lived kind of an unremarkable life. Can you think of anything that's just like, wow, that Isaac is involved in? I mean, when you come to Genesis 22, and there he is offered, that's not about Isaac. That's about Abraham. Then you look in Genesis 24, and it's time for Isaac to have a wife. And he's not heading up the wife search. It's Abraham. Even the story of Isaac getting a wife is really about Abraham. Abraham sends his servant out to and commissions him who and what to look for. That is incredible for us to consider. Genesis has 50 chapters. 12 of them are devoted to Abraham, his father. 10 of them are devoted to Jacob. 11 of them are devoted to Joseph. And two are devoted to Isaac. And in those 2 chapters, the story's really about Abraham. What an unremarkable life. Kind of makes me feel like maybe I can be numbered among the faithful. Because really faith, living faithful to God, is not about doing the remarkable things. And here it is, we see Isaac, who it says blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. When did he bless them? Relative to his life. This has got to come undone. Toward the end. He was about to die. And by faith, he blessed them. And that's what God chose to use as this amazing thing of faith. And when you think about it, what did Isaac try to do when it comes to blessing Jacob and Esau? Who had God chosen? Jacob. Who did Isaac want to bless? Man, he loved Esau. Esau was a manly man. Esau go out there and kill the wild game, bring it home to daddy, and feed daddy real good. He was a manly man, and Isaac loved that. But God had chosen Jacob. And so it is that Isaac, in rebellion to God's order, chooses to bless Jacob. You go out, you get me some good deer meat, you bring it back, you fill my belly, and I'm going to bless you. Well, Mama heard it, and Mama knew what God had said. So she tells Jacob, you go put you on some animal skins, and you go feed your daddy, and let him feel the hair on your arm. And Isaac blessed Jacob. When you go back to the text, when this happened, I think it's Genesis 27. When you go back to the text, you see that when Isaac realized that he had blessed Jacob and not Esau, he trembled. Scared him to death. He was full of fear. Why? Because he knew that he had tried to box God in and do his own thing, and God had defeated him. And Esau comes back from the hunt, and he says, Daddy, I'm ready to feed you. And he says, what do you mean? I've done ate, I'm full. I've done blessed. Who am I talking to? And Esau, he was all out of whack and tore up. And he says, but Daddy, what about my blessing? And Isaac said this, I have blessed him, and he shall be blessed. And he did that by faith. It was in that moment that Isaac did the greatest thing that he had ever accomplished in his life. And that is, he submitted and recognized the superiority of God. And that tells us that it's never too late to operate on the basis of faith. I mean, he was getting ready to pass, and he decided to do the right thing. Well, God did the right thing. Yeah. He was submissive, but that wasn't really about him, though. And so the greatest thing God chose, and that shows us that a lot of times, and we're going to see it here with Joseph in just a moment, sometimes the things that we think are noteworthy are not the things that God has chosen to make noteworthy. Let's continue. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on his staff. Now Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph. Who is he talking about? Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, there's 12 tribes of Judah, right? Of Israel. Judah, that comprise that nation. And Ephraim and Manasseh replaced two of Jacob's boys. Who do they replace? Yes. Joseph's boys take the blessing from Joseph, and Levi is going to be given land, cities basically. And so they're going to live among the entire nation so as to serve the people through their priesthood. And so Ephraim and Manasseh get the blessing, and it says that he worshiped leaning upon the top of his staff. What's significant about that statement? Why is he leaning upon the top of his staff? You remember something incredible happens in the life of Jacob, where he wrestled with who? Yeah, he wrestled with God. And he wrestled all night long, right? And the angel says, let me go. And what did Jacob say? Nuh-uh, not until you what? Not until you bless me. And the angel said, touched him right there, dislodged his hip. And I'd say that old boy probably walked with a limp the rest of his life. And as an old man, he is leaning on his staff, realizing the greatness of the God that he served, and he worshiped. Did Jacob live a perfect life? No, he really didn't. Jacob's life there were some iffy things that happened in Jacob's life. But when he came to the end of his life, he did the right thing. And he worshiped God. And it recalls here in Genesis 32 that great time in his life when he would not let God go. And he demanded the blessing. Now, verse 22, by faith, Joseph, when he died, he made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. Now here we run across a person with whom there is no shortage of incredible, biblical, faith-filled material. Joseph is an awesome man. Joseph was thrown in a pit, rejected by his brethren, sold into slavery, elevated in Egypt, falsely accused and cast into prison, left and forgotten, elevated again. Just the story of Joseph's life is incredible.
I've shared this ever since I heard it from a worldly person, a flight attendant. She had, some guy had fallen in love with her, was international financier. I found out we were in Washington, D.C., and she got picked up by a limo. We asked her the next day. She had pictures. She was, back at that time, she was at dinner with Anwar Sadat. Her husband had taken her to the dinner. But she had a lot of pictures, and she had underground silos that looked like our vertical ones, but they were deep and into the side of the hill. And I said, what are those? She said, that's the storage bins that Joseph had built. Now the point is, they know that in Egypt, and they tell people that on a tour. I don't know why it's been hidden from us.
Right.
But huge storage bins are there now that Joseph had built.
That's incredible. But with all of that material that God had to choose from, that we would have chosen from, remaining faithful in prison, being falsely accused, all of this, saving the world from famine. Wouldn't we choose that to write about when we're talking about the greatest thing a person's ever did? And here it is that God chooses his death. Joseph's faith was a memorial and a witness for years to come. By faith, when Joseph died, he made mention of the departing of the children of Israel. Now, when he died, the children of Israel were not yet captives in Egypt. I don't know what's going on, but just stay over there, right? But the children of Israel were not yet captives. The Pharaoh that knew not Joseph had not arisen yet. And so the 430 years of captivity in Egypt as they dwelt in the land of Goshen had not taken place yet. And yet Joseph, by faith, tells them there's going to come a day when you depart and you come to the land of promise. That God has promised Abraham, our father, a country, a land, a nation, a place to dwell that's flowing with milk and honey. And God is going to bring us to that place. And he said concerning his bones, bring me into that land. Well, he died. And for 430 years, his coffin stayed above ground as a witness to every young child that came by and said, who's that? What's that? What are they doing there? Oh, that's the great man Joseph. And he said that we're going to take his bones into the land of promise that God has given us one day. And for 400 plus years, his faith spoke generation after generation after generation as the taskmaster's whip was strong against their back. And as the days were long in making the bricks and the quotas increased and the ability that they were made to go get their own materials, and everything got worse and worse and worse. And for years and years, and there Joseph's carcass was saying, God has made a promise, and God is going to be true to that promise. And did God fulfill that promise? Absolutely. He sure did. Joseph's greatest act of faith was in commanding the children of Israel about his bones. Y'all bring me home with you. Verse 23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Now, this is back in Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2, the first 10 verses. There was a man of the house of Levi, took to wife a daughter of Levi. She conceived, she bore a son, and when she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. What had happened here? Pharaoh had commanded to kill all the little boys, didn't he? All the children. There was already a great act of faith in Exodus chapter 1 concerning midwives. What did they do? Did they kill the children? No. Sorry, Pharaoh, but these Hebrew women are strong. And before we can even get there, they've already delivered the child. They would not bow down to the commandment of this wicked and evil Pharaoh. And by faith, Moses' parents saw this special child. And they had more faith in God than they feared the commandment of the Pharaoh. They had more faith in the God that they served than they had fear of what might happen to them for their disobedience to that earthly government. What an example to us. Are we to obey the laws of the land and submit to our government? Absolutely. But are we to obey the laws of our God? Does the laws of our God supersede the laws of our land? Absolutely. And we see that here. And by faith, when he was born, he was hid 3 months of his parents. They saw that he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. I can't help but think of the faith that they displayed here. And do you think that Moses ever learned about this as he was raised in that house, of them hiding him in the reeds and that little ark that was pitched within and without?
For most of his life, I think he would fear for the life of his mother if he was found out.
True, absolutely. But at some point, Moses had to realize the great amount of faith that his parents had. See, for about 5 years or so, I guess, they were able to raise him in their house, and they were able to teach him about their God. And I can't help but think of Paul talking to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:5 when he says, when I first recall the faith that is in thee, that the unfeigned faith that is in thee, that first dwelt in thy grandmother Lois, and then in thy mother Eunice, and that is in thee also. There's a great responsibility we have as parents of portraying the faith and all that the knowledge and the practice that faith includes to our children. And Moses, when he was come to years, because of this, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And so that is verse number 24. And it was by faith that when he became old enough, he chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. When it came time to choose whether God was going to direct his life or whether Pharaoh was going to direct his life, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He allowed God to forge ahead with his life instead of the royal palace of Egypt. And what did that do? Well, he removed from him the protection of being the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He gave up the luxuries of the day, if you will, the finer things in life. And when you remove the protection of being the son of Pharaoh's daughter, what is going to then happen when he identifies with the children of Israel? Affliction. He chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. Now, I've written the last couple of days a couple things about the premillennial doctrine, but God's people have always suffered. God has always called on his people to suffer and to do it with integrity and to do it with dignity and to do it with faith in him. Well, the premillennial doctrine says that God's going to save all the faithful from any suffering, right? And they totally miss all of the Old Testament suffering, all the New Testament suffering, and the fact that God wants to bless us and develop something in us. But Moses chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God rather to be identified with the wicked people of Egypt. And it says rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. What if you enjoy sin your whole life? You ever known anybody like that? Yeah. I mean, you think of Hugh Hefner. Think of him. He had everything this world could ever offer a man. All the women, all the money, the biggest plot of land in the state of California, wherever it was. And he had every finer thing of life from this world standpoint, and he enjoyed it until the day he died. And you know what that was? That was just a short season. That was just a short season. All the money, all the women, all the fame, all the everything that he ever amassed, he left it all because his life was as a vapor. It was here only a little while. It vanished away, and now what has he got? Poor soul. The pleasures of sin, no matter how long you enjoy them, are just but a season, because that's what life is. All of our lives are just here for a little while, James 4, and then it vanishes away. So he chose to suffer. What does faith do? We've talked about faith all through this chapter, that faith, it refuses. He refused to be called. He chose. Faith chooses to do the right thing. Titus 2:11 and 12, for the grace of God brings salvation, has appeared to all men, instructing us that denying, there's the refusal, the denying ungodliness and worldly lust, that we should live soberly. There's the choosing. Faith chooses. Faith refuses. Faith suffers. And then verse 26, esteeming the reproach of Christ better, greater. Esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of reward. How did Moses esteem the reproach of Christ? What does that mean? That he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches. Moses suffered to bring a people out of bondage. And so did Christ. Christ suffered to offer you and I freedom and redemption and family and belonging and fellowship That's what Christ did. Christ suffered for that, and Moses suffered to bring the people out of Egypt. He esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches. I think of what Paul had written in Romans 8:18, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to even be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. There's greater riches in suffering here and now for what we get at the end. He says that he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. Egypt was an extremely wealthy and powerful nation. And all of that combined could not compare to the riches that we have laid up for us in heaven. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 4, to an inheritance that's incorruptible and undefiled, that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you. That's what we have. We have an inheritance that is phenomenal. It doesn't rust, it doesn't corrupt, it doesn't fade away. There are some things of the ancient dynasties and kings that have remained into this day, and we see them in museums, and there are crown jewels and this, that, and the other that have survived the test of time. But to large measure, everything that comprised those great kingdoms have dissolved. They've vanished away. They have no value. They're here no more. But the things that we have laid up in heaven are greater riches than anything this world has to offer. For he had respect unto the recompense of reward. God is faithful to reward his people. God has promised, and he is faithful, and he will do it. And that's something that we have to anchor our soul. Hebrews 6:18 and 19. That's something that we can lean upon. That is a foundational fact that should propel us in our faith through all the trials of life. God is faithful. He's made the promise. He will do it. He's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him, Hebrews 11 and 6. So by faith, verse 27, he forsook. So faith forsakes Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured. That's what faith does. Faith endures. Faith is more than just mental assent. Faith is more than just believing something. Faith has action. So faith refuses and chooses and suffers and forsakes and endures. And it says, as seeing him who is invisible. He forsook Egypt. He did not fear the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. What does faith do? We said this last week or the week before. Faith makes that which you cannot see and makes it real to you. Faith takes that which you cannot see and makes it concrete. It's real. The promise of the children of Israel getting the land of Canaan was real to Abraham, though he never possessed it. All of the promises of God are yes and amen, and we can see them through the eye of faith. Through faith, he kept the Passover. What is significant about that? Through faith, he kept the Passover. Well,
He celebrated the Passover even though they had not been delivered yet.
they had not been delivered, and what a silly idea. You kill this lamb, you take the blood and you swipe it on the doorpost and the lintel, and the death angel? What? This is crazy. And by faith, he did it. By faith, he complied to the instructions given of God. And what happened when the death angel visited the land of Egypt and Israel that night? All those that followed his faith and kept the Passover, their sons, their firstborn, were not destroyed. They were spared. but there had never been wailing heard in all of Egypt like was heard that night, from the palace of the Pharaoh on down to the poorest person in Israel. And it took faith. He kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. And by faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, when the Egyptians essayed to do were drowned. Now, this is an incredible account that we've discussed on Wednesday night in great detail. But God has brought them out of Egypt. And all kinds of wonderful signs were shown to demonstrate God's power over all the false gods of Egypt. Every time a plague came, God mowed down several of their false deities. Until Pharaoh was finally broken with that last great display of power in killing the firstborn. And so he sends them out. The text gives us the idea that he thrust them out. And just as God had said, they'll come out with great substance. They pillaged the people of Egypt. They gave them all kinds of stuff. Many of them also followed and wanted to go be with Israel because they recognized the superior of the Almighty God that Israel served. And so they tear out from Israel. And then old Pharaoh, this man of great indecision, starts to regret, if you will, his decision to send out all this great help. And so he goes out after them. Oh, he sees the way they go, and they're trapped. They're trapped by the sea and by the mountain, and I'm going to go get them. Oh, the people were sore afraid. And God deals with them by the parting of the Red Sea. The water stands up in a heap. They go across on dry ground. We talked about how later on in the text, the text tells us that the waters congealed. Literally, God turned the Red Sea to jello. He stood it up, congealed the waters, and they cross on dry land. And the Egyptians, they had a lot of gusto. They were not afraid. They were going right in behind those Egyptians to catch them. Oh, they had a lot of courage, didn't they? But they didn't have the same faith that Israel had. And God killed them in the midst of the Red Sea. And Israel saw all of their troubles wash up on the shore, dead and gone, to trouble them no more. It was by faith that they passed through. They had never done something so great before. They had never seen. This was the most awesome display of God's power that they had witnessed. When God split that sea approximately 3 miles wide, and they crossed on dry land. Friends, that was done by faith. Next week, we will get into the walls of Jericho falling, and maybe Wednesday night, as we get into Joshua, we may get to the walls of Jericho, but nevertheless, in 1 week, we're going to talk about Jericho twice. Thank you so much for your kind attention.